what you hear chanted here is the Gayatri mantra. Gayatri mantra. And if you look on the back of your handout, you've got several different translations of the Gayatri mantra listed out. There are several different ways to translate. We'll get to that, but that is currently said by many Hindus today, every day, as a mantra that they say every day. Though there's some controversy over whether or not that should be the case. We'll talk about that. There's a couple things that I want to say before we get started. One is that we are recording. Scott Smythe, who's not here this morning, was texting me last night saying, please tell me you're going to put this on Facebook Live. You're going to record it and put it on Facebook Live. And I've had other people ask this too. So we're doing that. I know that means that some of you are going to feel uncomfortable. Don't worry, the camera's not pointed at you. Some of you may feel uncomfortable then asking questions, and I understand that. And in fact, we've got so much information to cover that it's probably best if we don't do questions up front. But if someone can keep track of time and let me know when we get to about 9:40, and if I've gotten through enough of the material, we'll stop the live video and I'll take questions then. Unless you feel okay having your voice on Facebook Live. And if you're okay with that, then you can interrupt me and ask questions. The other thing that I want to say, we didn't get a chance to talk about this when we came up with our definition of religion, when we talked about the attributes of religion, when we named the different religions that we could think of, and we talked about how academics will rank the religions according to the population size, how many people are claiming to be adherents of this or that religion. One of the things that we never got a chance to really talk about is how we should approach religion. People are telling me to stand. Oh, because of that. Wonderful. Okay. Thank you.
Right where you were.
Right here. I should stand right here. Okay. Okay. Thank you. How should we come to these the texts and the ideas that are involved in these religions? I think that we should think of this as having a guest in our house, and so we should come with a sense of hospitality, and that means that we listen to what they have to say, and we do it as good hosts and hostesses. So we don't do it to get something out of it, but just for the sake of hearing what they have to say. And the reason why I want to emphasize this is there are two dangers when it comes to studying religions. On the one hand, it's natural for the human mind to make connections between what you already know and this new and different thing that you're hearing about, and to understand the new or different thing in terms of what you already know. So you're going to be tempted on the one hand to try and put what you're hearing into categories determined by your own Christian tradition. Don't do that. Listen to what they actually have to say. Don't assume that you understand or you know or that everybody's saying the same thing or whatever. You need to listen, pay attention, just like you would to a guest or a good friend. The other danger is that what you hear is so new and so different that you just turn off and you say, this is too weird and I don't know what to do with this, and it just sounds like craziness and I don't want to have anything to do with it. Again, that's going too far on the other side. Listen, try and understand, try and pay attention and attend to what's actually being said. This is how I think we should interact both with the text and the ideas that we're going to talk about, and also when we finally have our guest speaker from the Hindu Center of Virginia, how we should respond to that person also. That is, as good hosts, as someone seeking friendship, as someone willing to listen. So, with that said, the final piece of kind of prolegomena that I want to get across is that when I preach, or when here in adult Sunday school, when I teach you on matters of the Christian faith, I can speak with authority. Right? The bishop placed his hands on my head at one point in my life and said, I acknowledge that you are trained in the doctrine of this church, and he invested me with the authority to teach on his behalf, the bishop being the conveyor and guardian of the apostolic teaching or the apostolic doctrine. Nothing like that has happened with any of these other religions. I'm as much a student as you are when we're talking about Hinduism or Buddhism, or Islam or Judaism. I am just as much a student as you are. I just might have a little bit more academic background in it, but that's it. I'm still a student. I can get things wrong. I can get things wrong with Christian doctrine, but I can definitely get things wrong when I'm talking about Hinduism, and I can definitely pronounce things wrong. Just forgive me, okay? All right, let's get started because we have a whole lot to cover in a fairly short amount of time. And do I have a timekeeper who's paying attention? Okay, good. So when we talk about Hinduism now, we have in mind what you may call a religion. We'll get to that question at the end of this series, or what you may call a culture that has emerged from three ancient cultures of India. And you'll see this on your sheet. The first is the Adivasi. And let me just hold up. I meant to print out for you all also a map, but that's all right. I've got this one for you. So here's India, just so you get a sense of everything. Here's India, right? Here's China, this big chunk of land over here, separated by the Himalayas. You've got Nepal there. You have Pakistan here. And of course you need to understand that these nation-state designations are all modern, right? This is Muslims who had been living in India as a place for them to have their own nation-state after the British finally realized that they had no place over here. What I want to focus your attention on is this river right here, Indus Valley, the Indus River Valley. Here is the Ganges, which will be important, but we'll talk about that later. Because from prehistory, all of this area is called the Adivasi. That's not what they call themselves. That's like it's a modern designation similar to when we speak of the native peoples of the Americas as Native Americans. That's what Adivasi means. Who knows when they got there, but it was long before written records. And there are still people who trace their lineage back and therefore claim the status in India as Adivasi. And we don't know much about that culture. Really, we don't know basically anything about that culture because there are no written records. And there's not really any material artifacts either. But we do know that they were there. And just a quick note, when I talk about prehistory or something being prehistoric, you understand that this doesn't mean cavemen, right? And it means before written history. So prehistoric Britain was, or the British Isles, was the British Isles before the Romans showed up and brought Latin, right? So prehistory is different in different places. It has a different timeline in different places. It just has to do with when there are written records. All right. That was one culture, the Adivasi culture. The other one that we need to know about is the Indus River Valley civilization. We don't actually have a name for them, so they're just named for where they seem to be located. And again, that's right up here by the Indus River. This civilization existed from around 3000 BC to around 1500 BC. And they may have had a written language. There are these things like pottery and such that have been found that have pictures and some kind of markings on it that looks like it's language, but if it is a written language, nobody's deciphered it yet. But it was one of the major ancient civilizations. You think of the Mesopotamian, the Egyptian, the Chinese, and then this is the fourth one, the Indus River Valley civilization. These were the four main ancient civilizations. So we don't know. Again, we don't know very much. There's very little that we know about their culture. All that we know is in terms of material artifacts. And they have all sorts of material artifacts. Like I said, pottery, but also children's toys. They found the vast cities that are laid out on grid patterns. There's a very set weight system for weighing things like grain and such. So they were an important civilization. We just don't know much about them. One thing that's been found in terms of, they found dice. And that's going to be, for some odd reason, very important. But we'll get to that. Finally, and this is the most important one for us, I'm running out of time. We may not get to questions today. Is the Vedic culture of the Aryans, or Aryans. This is the same term that, of course, Hitler and the Nazis used. European race, perfect race, or whatever. It's all what they thought was all bunk, right? I mean, they were drawing on some of the science at the time, but none of that's believed now. We don't know much about them except that they were nomadic peoples, and they did speak Sanskrit. Sanskrit is from the Indo-European language family, so it's related to that we understand. For reasons we won't get into. And so what they were doing is moving down, away from their big cities, down into the southern part of the subcontinent. These Indus River Valley peoples, and the Aryans are coming in behind them. And there may have been some skirmishes. The way these things always get told was that there was great big battles, but in fact, there's not a whole lot of evidence for that. What it probably was a lot of intermarriage of the Aryans and the Indus River Valley civilization, their waning culture, and even maybe some of the culture of the Adivasi. I call it the Vedic culture because it's the Aryans writing in Sanskrit who produced the Vedas. And the Vedas are the most important, you might say, the foundational scriptural texts of Hinduism and of India. And just really quick, you should hear Indus River is where we get the name India and Hindus, right, in Hinduism. It comes from that civilization based around that river. So the Vedas, of which there are 4, and we'll come back to that in a minute, written in Sanskrit. The story goes that there were these extraordinarily holy men named rishis, who were able to hear the very language of the universe, the hymns of creation being sung by the cosmos itself. And of course it was in Sanskrit. And they learned and memorized these hymns, and they repeated them for generations. They created this great oral culture of passing down these Vedas. So the Vedas are part of a body of literature known as Shruti, which means that which is heard. There are, as I said, 4 Vedas, which were, if you're not fully on board with the rishis hearing it at the beginning of time, well, scholars would say composed probably between circa 1500 BC and circa 800 BC. Composed orally and passed down orally, probably not written down until around 500 BC. So that's 500 years before Christ, right? The 4 Vedas are the Rig Veda, which is the knowledge of the verses. Veda just means knowledge. The Sama Veda, which is knowledge of the chants. The Yajur Veda, knowledge of the rituals. And the Atharva Veda, knowledge of the Atharvans, which is a name for the priests. So these spells or charms. And I'd like to read some to you, but I don't know how much time I have. What time do we got? 9:35. 9:35? Oh, okay, good. We're not doing as bad as I thought. From the Rig Veda, then. This is one of the creation hymns because there's multiple creation hymns, and they don't all say the same thing. So here's one of them. There was neither non-existence nor existence then. There was neither the realm of space nor the sky which is beyond. What stirred? Where? In whose protection? Was there water, bottomless deep? There was neither death nor immortality then. There was no distinguishing sign of night nor of day. That one breathed, windless by its own impulse. Other than that, there was nothing beyond. Darkness was hidden by darkness in the beginning, with no distinguishing sign. All this was water. The life force that was covered with emptiness, that one arose through the power of heat. Desire came upon that one in the beginning. That was the first seed of mind. Poets, seeking in their heart with wisdom, found the bond of existence and non-existence. Their cord was extended across. Was there below? Was there above? There were seed placers. There were powers. There was impulse beneath. There was giving forth above. Who really knows? Who will here proclaim it? Whence was it produced? Whence is this creation? The gods came afterwards with the creation of this universe. Who then knows when itself? Or perhaps it did not. The one who looks down on it in the highest heaven, only he knows. Or perhaps he does not. So that's one of the creation hymns of the Rig Veda. And you notice then that not even the gods know where the universe came from or how the cosmos were created. A pretty straightforward story, but I find that one particularly interesting. So the Rig Veda is the most important and the oldest of the 4 Vedas. And so that's the one that I'll be reading to you from a couple times this morning. But if you're wondering about the gods, or as they're known in the Vedas and in Hinduism as Devas, or the shining ones, there were 33, supposedly 33 in the Vedas. And I've listed some of them out for you. There's Indra, the king of the Devas. He's a warrior. He performs the great sacrifice. He wields lightning. There's Agni. He's the Deva of fire. He's a deva of sacrifice. In some sense, he's like the priest of the devas. There's Soma. Soma, who has hymns to her within the Rig Veda. She's a Devi. She's a goddess. And she's a personification of this intoxicating, perhaps hallucinogenic drink that was used during the rituals in the ancient culture, Vedic culture. There's Varuna, the deva of the sky, who's also the keeper of divine law and the order of the cosmos. There's Yama, the deva of death, the king of the dead, the place where your fathers go. This is a good time to stop and point out that in the Vedic literature, the basic scripture of Hinduism, there's not yet a concept of reincarnation. So there's a couple different descriptions of what happens. Some descriptions are you die and you just go into the elements of the earth. Some descriptions are you go to the realm of Yama, the god of death, and live with your fathers. There is a mention of Vishnu, who we'll hear about much more later, but at this point, he's kind of a lesser deva. He's just a beneficent deva connected to the sun. He's a solar deva. Also, there's a deva who's a wild and unpredictable storm and wind deva. And Rudra will come back up in later talks also, but not this morning. Finally, in the Vedas, if you think that they're these deeply spiritual hymns, which you would guess because they were heard by the rishis and are the very music of creation, you might be surprised to find a hymn like the Gambler's Lament in the Rig Veda, wherein dice are spoken of and referred to, kind of addressed as a kind of lesser deva. And the unlucky throw of the dice is known as Kali, which will come back up again as a Devi in much later classical Hinduism. And the kind of Devi you don't want to meet in a dark alley, but we'll get to that later. If I've got the time, what time is that? That's 9:40? All right, no questions, because we have so much to get through. I want you to hear a little bit of the Gambler's Lament.
Is that by Kenny Rogers?
That's right. Exactly. It does. It sounds like an ancient blues or country song. Let me find it here real quick. If I look in the table of contents, that might be better. All right, so the Gambler's Lament. I'm just going to read a couple of little sections of it. The trembling tree, born in a hurricane, intoxicate me as they roll on the furrowed board. The dice seem to me like a drink of soma from Mount Mujavant, keeping me awake and excited. She did not quarrel with me or get angry. She was kind to my friends and to me. Because of a losing throw of the dice, I have driven away my devoted wife. My wife's mother hates me, and my wife pushes me away. The man in trouble finds no one with sympathy. They all say I find a gambler as useless as an old horse that someone wants to sell. Skipping down a little bit, he says, when I swear I will not play with them, that is the dice, I am left behind by my friends as they depart. But when the brown dice raise their voice as they are thrown down, I run at once to the rendezvous with them like a woman to her lover. The gambler goes to the meeting hall asking himself, will I win? And trembling with hope. But the dice cross him and counter his desire, giving the winning throws to his opponent. And he goes on, and finally he says to the dice, grant us your friendship. Have pity on us. Do not bewitch us with the force of your terrible sorcery. Lay to rest your anger, your hatred. Let someone else fall into the trap of the brown dice. So that's part of the Rig Veda. And shows you, one, that for some reason, dice keeps showing up as a leitmotif throughout Hinduism. We'll see it again when we get to the epic poem, the Mahabharata. But it just seems from the Indus River civilization on down, dice and gambling with dice seem to be a problem that even the gods have to deal with. So, and this may have been because as the Aryans came down into this, they found, oh, these Indus River Valley folks have this great game with these things called dice, and then they got too wrapped up in it. Who knows? One thing that this, but you don't necessarily go in Hinduism. Rather, the flawless articulation and intonation of the Sanskrit of the Vedas is what's important. Not the meaning of the words, but that the Brahmins, the priests, when they're doing their rituals, precisely pronounce the Sanskrit, which is the music of creation. That's what's important. Most people, Sanskrit quickly became quickly from the long perspective of history, a kind of dead language used only by the Brahmins, only by the priests. Whereas other kind of what we might call vulgate forms or vulgar forms of Sanskrit, like Hindi, emerged as the language of the common people. Most people couldn't even read the Vedas, right? But they could hear, and this was what was important. In hearing the Brahmin pronounce the words precisely, they were hearing the music of the universe that existed before even the gods. Okay? And so this is the job of the Brahmins. Only the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas and Vaishyas, those known as the twice-born in Indian society, were allowed to listen to, for an extended period of time, or read the Vedas when they eventually got written down. And you need to know that this list of three classes of society, the Brahmins, the Kshatriyas, and the Vaishyas, make up a very small portion, even now, but especially in ancient times, a very small portion of society. What's my time look like, by the way? 9:46. Okay. So that brings us to the caste system, because here I am talking about these classes of people, and we haven't said who they are. Caste comes from a Portuguese word, and this Portuguese word was used by Portuguese missionaries and explorers when they came to India. The Portuguese word is Caste. Do you know the word?
I'm waiting to hear.
Okay. It means something like breed, right? But it's not a indigenous Indian word. It's not a Hindi or Sanskrit word. Instead, what they refer to are the Varna and the Juti. And we're not really going to get into the Juti because that's too complicated and above my pay grade. But the Varna we will talk about. And the Varna are the four levels of society that you could be in. There are the Brahmins, who are the priests, who are the religious teachers, philosophers, theologians. The Kshatriyas, I'm sorry, I'm trying to pronounce that right. Kshatriyas, that's going to be as close as I can get this morning, who are can be large landowners, but are also merchants and artisans. They make up the top three classes of society, and are known as the twice-born, which we'll come back to, and are a small percentage of the population. If you remember when we talked about ancient agrarian societies, all basically have this kind of structure, where you have the retainer class of priests always kind of in struggle with the ruling class of warriors, and then you have merchants who are able to have some upward social mobility. and the majority of people in agrarian societies are always peasants, and that's the Shudras. They're the peasants and the servants. And then there's another group who are not part of the caste system itself. They are not part of Varna. They are so low that they have no place in it. And these are the outcasts, literally, the pariahs. They have no status as human beings in society. I'm sorry?
I said, that's me.
Oh, I thought you said that's me. Really quickly, this will be the last thing I read to you from the Rig Veda, but it's in the Veda itself. So in the Veda we have another creation hymn, and I don't know that I'll read the whole thing, but I'll read some of it. It talks about what's translated here as the man. It's more like the primeval man, primordial man, or more like, but they call it the man. The man has 1,000 heads, 1,000 eyes, 1,000 feet. It is the man who is all this, whatever. Such is his greatness, and the man is yet more than this. All creatures are a quarter of him. 3/4 are what is immortal in heaven. 3/4 the man rose upwards, and 1/4 of him still remains there. And to that which eats, and that which does not eat. And we're going to jump down to the point where they, the gods, anointed the man who is the sacrifice, born at the beginning, upon the sacred grass. With him the gods, Sadgas and sages sacrificed. From that sacrifice, in which everything was offered, the melted fat was collected, and he made it into those beasts who live in the air, in the forests, in the villages. From that sacrifice in which everything was offered, the verses and chants were born, the meters were born from it, and from it the formulas were born, that is, the Vedas themselves. Horses were born from it, and those other animals that have 2 rows of teeth. Cows were born from it, and from it goats and sheep were born. When they divided the man, into how many parts did they apportion him? What do they call his mouth? His 2 arms, and thighs, and feet. His mouth became the Brahman. His arms were made into the warrior, or the Kshatriya. His thighs, the people, the Vaishyas. And from his feet, the servants, or the Shudra, were born. So even there in the Vedas, we have the establishment of this caste system, or the Varna. And this was strictly held. You did not break caste. In fact, a modern, he may not call himself Hindu, but a modern Indian. In Hinduism, you can believe anything, just keep caste. Don't break caste. Well, anyway, we'll leave that aside. Like I said, there's another part of this, the GT, which is about, okay, we're really running out of time. I'm almost done. This is further gradations in class and society based on things like gender, your place of residence, and your actual occupation. Because just because you're a Brahmin doesn't mean you're necessarily going to be doing priestly things. If there's a whole lot of Brahmins in town, you might not get work, and you've got to do some farming yourself or something like that. So you find yourself in a different duty than, say, other Brahmins. All right. All 3 of the top layer, which is a very small percent of the population, are known as the Dvija, or twice born. They each go, they're twice born because at a certain point in their boyhood, this is primarily for men, although there's some modern movements to make it for women too. At a point in your boyhood, when you transition into manhood, which is different for each caste, there's a ritual rite of passage that you go through, after which you receive a thread, the sacred thread that you'll wear over your left shoulder and across your chest. And that will be a sign that you are twice born, and therefore that means you have a particular status in society, but it also means you can listen to and read now the Vedas, which is unique because I don't think this was ever actually applied, that there is a law, an ancient law, that if a Shudra were to be caught listening to the Vedas recited, they should have molten metal poured in their ears. I don't think that ever happened, but that's how, how important it is to keep the Vedas just among the twice born. All right, we're almost done. The additional Shruti, or things that are heard. This is the kind of follow-up material that gets written down in between 900 and 500 BC to help understand and apply the Vedas. These are the Brahmanas, which are ritual handbooks used by the Brahmin priests. There are the Aranyakas, or wilderness books, which get into the symbolism and the meaning of the rituals in the Vedas. And finally, there are the Upanishads, written between 700 and 500 BC. These are, when most people think of Hinduism and the great teachings of Hinduism, they're actually thinking about the Upanishads. This is where it gets into the philosophy and the theology of Hinduism. What does all this mean? How do we understand it? And we'll spend more time on the Upanishads when we talk about Advaita Vedanta later on. So, finally, the Gayatri mantra that we started with, which you see at the bottom of your sheet. This mantra comes from the Vedas and was part of the twice-born's ritual, rite of passage, that they learn this. It's now, since the 19th century, there's been a movement for all Hindus to say this. But, as you might imagine, some of the twice-born, and particularly the Brahmins, don't like that. And they want the lower caste Hindus to quit saying this. At the same time, there's still this movement to make it more popular and something that's said by everybody. I think I'm going to have to end there, and hopefully we're not